There are 4 types of students at the school: ordinary students, geeks, losers, and bullies. Out of these groups, Annie doesn't fit in with the bullies or the nerds. She's a mix between an ordinary student and a nerd. You could call her an ordinary nerd. She wants to live a normal life, like a flowing river or falling leaves, just going with the flow. However, one day, a bully suddenly comes into her life. It changes everything. She just wants to live peacefully, but now, things are different. Hyojinsu, whom Annie met in middle school, tried hard to imitate the cool kids who messed around. He wanted to look good and fit in, but he ended up being the only one who showed off. He tried too hard to be nice to those kids, but they just made fun of him. They told him to crack jokes, but then said he was no fun and ignored him. Hyojinsu was always alone, and Annie felt bad seeing him by himself. One day, Annie approached him and invited him to eat with her. She was the first one to reach out to him. Hyojinsu, grateful for her kindness, left a strange comment about making her his girlfriend someday before he disappeared from her life. A year later, out of the blue, Annie receives a text from Hyojinsu asking if she is doing well and suggesting they meet. The moment begins. Annie's friend Jessie asks if it's true that Hyojinsu, whom they used to consider a loser, has sent Annie a message. Jessie mentions rumors of his supposed transformation, suggesting he's now hanging out with the cool kids and mistreating girls. Annie hesitates, not sure how to respond to Jessie's questions about whether she replied to his message. Jessie encourages Annie, noting that she was the one who showed kindness to Hyojinsu when he was bullied, speculating whether he might have developed feelings for her since middle school. Annie tries to deflect the conversation, but Jessie wonders aloud why Hyojinsu hasn't contacted her instead, given her own qualities. They discuss ignoring him, believing if he's serious, he won't reach out again. In a brief flashback, Annie recalls her past interactions with Hyojinsu, remembering how she once helped him during a tough time. Now, as they discuss the situation over food, Annie decides to indulge in another bowl of ramen, prompting Jessie to suggest trying a new type of noodles. However, it turns out Hyojinsu's persistence exceeds Jessie's expectations. Despite not being very close during middle school, Annie finds his constant messages awkward. She continues to ignore him while focusing on eating and studying throughout the night. Finally, overwhelmed by his persistence, she exclaims in frustration, unable to handle it any longer. Though they knew each other in middle school, Annie tried not to hurt Hyojinsu, but she can't endure it any longer. She texts him, apologizing and claiming she has a boyfriend now. He responds humorously, implying he doesn't believe her. Annie insists she's serious, but Hyojinsu continues to joke around, questioning her sincerity. Frustrated, Annie reaffirms that she's telling the truth, but he responds with laughter emojis. Annie feels annoyed as she tries to argue back, but deep down, she knows he's right. When Jessie notices her crying, Annie shows her the messages on her phone. Jessie reacts surprised that Hyojinsu is still texting her, and Annie explains how she told him she has a boyfriend to make him stop, but now she's worried about the consequences. Jessie asks if Annie wants her honest opinion, but Annie brushes it off, knowing Jessie has already said enough. Jessie suggests using a trick, putting up a picture of an attractive guy as her profile photo to make Hyojinsu believe she's taken. Annie loves the idea and praises Jessie for her cleverness. She encourages Annie to go ahead with the plan, telling her to give it her best shot. They discuss the strategy of using a handsome guy's photo as a deterrent, hoping it will finally convince Hyojinsu to back off. When Annie got home that night, she started searching for pictures of handsome men. She found many attractive ones that looked like celebrities, but she wanted someone who seemed a bit ordinary yet still the best choice. Finally, she picked one and used it as her profile picture. She felt satisfied but thought it looked like it was missing something, so she posted it with a caption. Looking at the photo, she imagined having a real boyfriend and admired how good he looked. She convinced herself that at this rate, Hyojinsu wouldn't have anything to say. "I'll sleep now," Mr. Boyfriend, she chuckled to herself, planning to return to her quiet and peaceful life the next day. Meanwhile, Ashton's friend notices the photo Annie used, asking Ashton if he got a girlfriend without informing them. Ashton responds nonchalantly, hinting not to be upset about possibly losing out on another friend. Another friend looks at the photo in disbelief. At that time, Annie didn't realize that her plan to deter Hyojinsu would lead to unforeseen complications. What seemed like a simple solution turned into a more complicated situation than she expected. Annie hugs her supposed boyfriend, thanking him for waiting and expressing how much she missed him. She feels warm and happy to have a boyfriend for the first time. Suddenly, Hyojinsu appears and laughs, refusing to believe she has a boyfriend and questioning why she's trying to avoid him by pretending. Annie tries to assert that the person with her is her boyfriend, but her words fail her. Hyojinsu mocks her, insisting she'll never have a boyfriend no matter what. Frustrated, Annie insists she really does have a boyfriend now, and even changed her profile picture to his photo just yesterday. Annie wakes up startled from a nightmare where Hyojinsu was chasing her, insisting she didn't have a boyfriend. She realizes it was just a bad dream caused by her lie about having a boyfriend. Oh right, KakaoTalk, she mutters nervously, hesitant to check her phone. She worries that Hyojinsu won't believe her, just like in her dream. She had hoped lying about having a boyfriend would make him stop bothering her, but now she fears he might get even more persistent and harass her. Annie debates whether to ignore and block him if he continues to contact her. She checks her phone anxiously, but there are no messages from him. She breathes a sigh of relief, feeling grateful that he hasn't reached out, and silently thanks her friend Jessie for the advice. Today, Annie sings happily, feeling good about her mood. As she plans to show off to her friend Yo at school, she's interrupted by a leaking pipe that splashes water on her trousers. Confused by the early morning mishap, she brushes it off, thinking it doesn't really matter. Annie decides that from today onward, she's finally free from dealing with Hyojinsu. Annie's mom notices her wet pants and asks why they are wet. Annie explains about the pipe leak from yesterday. Her mom expresses frustration that Annie didn't tell her sooner, but tells her to endure it for the day. Despite this, Annie remains unusually happy. Her family members notice her strange behavior, and wonder what's going on with her today. One suggests she might have gone a bit crazy. Annie thinks the reason Hyojinsu stopped bothering her is because of the picture trick she used. She doesn't suspect that he might have other motives. She tells her parents she's heading to school, but she's worried that her KakaoTalk profile picture might cause trouble. As Annie waits for the elevator, it keeps stopping at upper floors, making her anxious about being late. Finally, it arrives, and she's relieved. She checks to see who might be playing a prank, but her relief turns to shock when she sees Kang-a-hun, a neighbor who often shows off his body without hesitation. Annie realizes she narrowly avoided a potential disaster, and reflects on how appearances can be deceiving. She feels excited and almost faints seeing how handsome Kang-a-hun is. He mentions the elevator door closing, asking if she's coming in. She agrees and walks in, unable to take her eyes off him. He notices and asks if she has something to say, but she denies it, though she keeps glancing at him because of his looks. When the elevator stops, she thanks him and quickly bends down to pick up her bag that almost fell. She grabs it and rushes off, leaving him amused by her actions. Later, Kang-a-hun thinks to himself that Annie is an interesting person. Annie feels incredibly embarrassed after her awkward encounter in the elevator. As she steps out, a bird poops on her head, adding to her already bad day. She wonders what's going wrong and concludes that it must be a streak of bad luck. Passing by, Annie overhears people murmuring about her, calling her weird. She tries to brush it off and convinces herself that she's been lucky since the morning, but then she hears thunder, finding it odd. Reflecting on the events, she feels uneasy and hopes the rest of her day will improve. She heard that the weather is supposed to be good today, though she feels like the weather forecast is actually predicting her day. Suddenly, Jessie appears and grabs her hand, asking why she isn't in class. Before Annie can respond, Jessie interrupts and insists that Annie follow her immediately. Confused and curious, Annie asks what's going on, but Jessie pulls her towards the restroom without answering. Wondering what could be happening, Annie goes along with her. Jessie exclaims, "You're driving me crazy." Annie asks what's wrong, but Jessie insists she'll show her instead. Annie tries to put her bag down, but Jessie interrupts, showing her the picture on her phone. Annie realizes that setting that picture as her profile has made Hyojinsa stop bothering her. Before she can fully process it, Jessie interrupts, expressing disbelief and calling Annie crazy. She warns Annie about Ashton Griffin, asking if she knows who he is. Annie is shocked to hear Ashton Griffin's name, known as the intimidating leader of the school thugs. She asks to confirm if it's really him, worried about the implications. Ashton Griffin is the toughest guy in school, and everyone knows not to mess with him. There's a saying that if you get on his bad side, you're in big trouble. But Annie accidentally disrupted his peace, and now he's glaring at her. Will her quiet school life end like this? Joel, Ashton's quirky friend, mentions how Annie almost broke her phone yesterday because of all the drama. William, the smart class president known for handling tough situations, acknowledges that Ashton often causes trouble. Annie considers asking William for help, but she's unsure if he'd lend a hand. She thinks carefully, knowing Ashton's tough reputation and the consequences of crossing him. Joel mentions that the girl who's now Ashton Griffin's girlfriend goes to their school. William seems interested and asks Joel if he thinks she's brave for posting Ashton's picture with a heart. Joel agrees, finding her actions cool. Seo, on the other hand, questions Joel's perspective, wondering how that could be considered cool. Jessie urges Annie to hurry into the classroom, but Annie tells her not to rush. Jessie notices William staring at Annie and asks if she's been caught already. She suggests Annie skip school due to the tense atmosphere inside. Despite the situation, Annie laughs, trying to stay composed. She reassures herself that in a big school like theirs, no one will figure out who she really is. Feeling confident, she walks into the classroom confidently. Just as she enters, someone shouts that they found Ashton's girlfriend's number. Annie panics, realizing she's in trouble, and wishes she could disappear. Starting a new class every semester can be stressful. Sometimes you're lucky and end up in the same class as your best friend. Other times, you're forced to befriend people you weren't close with before, which can be awkward. In some cases, you have to find new people to get along with. But one thing everyone knows for sure, avoid the school thugs at all costs. Ashton angrily asks who put up his picture, feeling like his school life in the new semester is ruined. Someone informs him that the girl responsible, Annie Green, is present. They find her name interesting, just like her actions. Ashton directly asks Annie about it, while William advises ignoring the situation. Joel is curious and wants to know more. Seo questions what they'll do if they find out who Annie is. Ashton decides they should see what she looks like first before taking further action. He dials Annie's number to get answers. If things keep going this way, Annie worries she'll get caught. She feels the urgency to escape. Just as she thinks she might make it, her phone rings, catching Ashton's attention. He approaches her and directly asks if she's Annie Green. Annie tries to play it cool, but Ashton is visibly upset. He grabs her bag to stop her from running away. Annie tries to reason with him, asking to talk things out calmly. But Ashton is furious, accusing her of using his picture without permission. She attempts to explain herself, but he is relentless. He refuses to listen and drags her away. In desperation, she calls out for Jessie's help, but it seems hopeless as Ashton pulls her away. Jessie watches helplessly as Annie is taken away, feeling powerless to intervene. The bell rings, marking the end of the ordeal. Ashton Griffin is called out by Mrs. Jones, the homeroom teacher, for his actions. She scolds Ashton for potentially causing trouble on the first morning of the semester. Ashton denies it, but Mrs. Jones insists he was about to start something. Mrs. Jones reminds Ashton about the crackdown on school bullying and accuses him of trying to bully his classmate. She emphasizes that bullying is not tolerated in her classroom and grabs his ear to emphasize her point. She warns Ashton sternly that any trouble from him will not be tolerated. Ashton gets upset and curses. Mrs. Jones scolds him for swearing. He questions if she can grab his ear like that, saying she's the one acting like a bully. He threatens to report Mrs. Jones and asks for a flyer. Mrs. Jones ignores his threat and tries to take his phone, but he refuses to give it. Meanwhile, Annie is unsure what to do. She considers telling Mrs. Jones the truth that she started the trouble, or leaving Ashton to face Mrs. Jones alone. Annie feels stuck and doesn't know how to handle the situation. They are arguing over the phone. Annie feels like she's facing a big decision, a moment when she can't avoid taking action. She worries about the consequences of getting involved, but she knows if she doesn't help now, class won't start smoothly. Annie debates what to do. She's torn between helping Ashton and fearing what might happen if Mrs. Jones catches her. No, but Annie can't ignore her conscience telling her to stand up for Ashton. Finally, she decides to take a risk and intervene. He wasn't bullying me, Annie tells Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones is surprised and asks for clarification. Annie explains that Ashton just wanted to see her math workbook. She says Ashton suddenly wants to study hard, specifically interested in logarithms and exponentials. Mrs. Jones asks Ashton directly if this is true. Annie worries that if Ashton reveals the truth, her peaceful school life will be ruined. Just as Ashton is about to speak, Annie intervenes, quickly stepping on him. "You wanna die?" Ashton asks sharply. Annie quickly responds, explaining that Ashton expressed interest in studying hard. Mrs. Jones questions Annie's honesty, but Ashton intervenes, urging her to drop the issue. Reluctantly, Mrs. Jones releases the phone and gives Ashton a warning to focus on his studies. She then instructs both Annie and Ashton to return to their seats as class is about to begin. Annie feels a chill down her spine as she senses Ashton's intense gaze on her. She worries that her actions have put her in serious trouble. Jessie warns her that Ashton is still glaring at her, looking like he's ready to explode. Annie turns to see him smiling wickedly, masking his anger. She reflects on how she intervened with Mrs. Jones, saving Ashton from further trouble. Ashton, on the other hand, dismisses the idea of studying, finding it meaningless. Annie fears what repercussions her actions might have on her school life from now on. Annie shivers in the cold, regretting their decision to go out to the track during break. Jessie suggests going back inside, but Annie hesitates, mentioning Ashton's presence indoors. She recalls accidentally stepping on his foot earlier. Jessie jokes about facing fears head-on like walking out of a lion's den. Annie comments on how intimidating Ashton is compared to lions. Feeling overwhelmed, Jessie decides to head back inside, leaving Annie alone. William notices Annie sitting by herself and approaches her. William finds Annie alone and asks what she's doing there. He notes the irony of being marked by Ashton Griffin, and now sharing a class with William. He offers her a drink to warm up. She questions the gesture, but he explains it's because of the cold weather. He suggests talking to Ashton about what happened earlier, but she declines, saying she'll handle it herself. She bids him goodbye and leaves. Meanwhile, Zack Snyder, Ashton's football-focused friend, notices Annie and wonders who she is. He's surprised to see William somewhat flustered. Zack reminds William about the bell ringing, and they head off together. Annie feels trapped as she stands outside her classroom. She receives a text from Ashton threatening her if she doesn't save his number. Peeking into the room, she hopes Ashton isn't there, but he's sitting right at her desk, intensely focused on his phone. Overwhelmed, Annie starts crying. She's too frightened to respond to his message, wondering if ignoring him has made him even angrier. The fear grips her so much that she can't bring herself to step into the classroom. The bell rings, signaling the end of class. Annie feels relieved that the lesson is over. During the class, she devised a plan to restore things to normal as quickly as possible. Her plan is simple yet secretive. She resolves to gather information about Ashton discreetly, without getting caught. She tells herself to be careful and thorough in her mission to understand her enemy. Jung asks what's for lunch today. Ashton shrugs, saying he doesn't know. Joel chimes in, mentioning that talking about food is making him hungry. William informs them it's chicken today, Joel's favorite. Excited, Joel predicts the lunch line will be long. Jung urges Ashton to hurry up, but Ashton doesn't feel like going. Seo comments on Ashton's laziness outweighing his hunger. Joel suggests they go without Ashton, and William agrees. They left without a second thought. This is my chance, Annie thinks to herself. If he doesn't eat school lunch, then I'll become the person everyone wants to be with. She's figured out a natural way to ask Ashton for forgiveness, become his bread shuttle. In movies, popular kids always have someone who brings them food. Since Ashton isn't eating lunch today, maybe bringing him bread will soften him up. She struggles to decide on the best flavor of bread for him. It's a bit of a pain to be his bread shuttle, but she sees it as karma. The cafeteria lady reminds her to hurry up as the bell will ring soon. She finally decides on sweet potato bread, thinking that Ashton probably prefers bread since he doesn't eat in the cafeteria much. Zach suggests sweet potato bread is a good choice. She trusts Zach's suggestion because he's Ashton's friend. She places her order, 1 sweet potato bread for Ashton and a few more for others just in case. Zach comments to himself that she might be clueless because Ashton only eats chocolate bread. Realizing her mistake, she quickly adds a chocolate bread to her order. He surprises her by suggesting strawberry cream bread instead. Confused, she wonders why he keeps changing his mind about the bread flavor. Her attempt at peace with bread fails miserably when Ashton questions its effectiveness. Annie pleads for forgiveness, tears welling up. Seo casually accepts the bread as a dessert substitute, but Ashton dismisses everyone, declaring he's going to sleep. Annie's bread plan collapses, leaving her regretful that disturbing Ashton's nap only seems to have made things worse. She ponders her next move, feeling the weight of Ashton's gaze. Suddenly, Ashton interrupts her thoughts, questioning her staring. Throughout class, her failed lunchtime plan occupies her mind, but she can't find a solution under his watchful eyes. Feeling trapped, she realizes escape is her only option. Convinced Ashton has left, she moves to make her getaway, but her hopes are dashed when he unexpectedly grabs her from behind. He asks where she thinks she's going, and she quickly invents an excuse about meeting her friend Jessie. Trying to diffuse the tension, she smiles, hoping it will placate him, but Ashton isn't buying it. He questions her sincerity, asking if she thinks he's stupid. She continues with her desperate plea, calling herself a poor little turtle in tears. When she begs Jessie for help, her friend abandons her, leaving Annie to face Ashton's wrath alone. She screams in disbelief as Jessie runs away, leaving her to deal with Ashton. Ashton's hand is suddenly grabbed by someone, and they urge him to leave, mentioning that everyone is waiting outside. This prompts Ashton to leave immediately. Annie, feeling relieved that she's still unharmed, exhales deeply. Shortly after, Ashton calls out to Annie using the nickname Squirtle. Confused, she asks if he means her. He confirms and tells her to get ready for her job. Jung calls out to Ashton and asks him to wait, but Ashton continues walking away without paying attention. Annie wonders anxiously about the meaning behind Ashton's words. Just as she's pondering this, Seo interrupts, addressing Annie and thanking her before heading off. Annie calls out to Jessie and kicks her from behind. Jessie turns around, asking who did that. Annie reveals herself and questions Jessie about leaving her behind earlier. Jessie apologizes, saying she had to save herself. Annie laments her situation, feeling completely targeted by Ashton. Jessie asks what Ashton did to her, and Annie recalls Ashton calling her Squirtle. Annie questions why she's being compared to a Squirtle, to which Jessie jokes that she kind of resembles one. Annie protests, but Jessie runs off, teasing Annie that she's in trouble when caught. Later that day, Annie walks through the door and greets her mom, who immediately asks her to change and come to the kitchen. Her mom excitedly mentions the new neighbors moving in upstairs, and how she received rice cakes from them, but didn't get a chance to properly say hello. She encourages Annie to go greet them since they have a son around her age, emphasizing the importance of knowing neighbors. Annie agrees and takes the rice cakes upstairs to thank them for the delicious treats before returning to her mom in the kitchen. Annie grumbles about her mom probably timing dinner just to make her take the rice cakes upstairs. As she stands at the neighbor's door, she tries to recall if there's anything specific she should remember about the new neighbor upstairs. She rings the bell and waits for someone to answer. Annie encounters the shirtless guy from the elevator earlier that day. She tries to play it cool, but ends up flustered when he accuses her of staring. Despite her protests, he continues teasing her, causing her to cover her eyes. In an attempt to help, he accidentally drops a plate of kimchi pancakes. Annie rushes to explain she was delivering rice cakes from her mom. After a brief exchange, she hurriedly leaves, leaving him with an impression of her as an interesting girl. Annie is puzzled by Ashton's nickname for her, Squirtle. She worries it implies she's slow or timid like a turtle. In her imagination, she sees herself trapped while Ashton orders her around, calling her Squirtle. Suddenly, she realizes Squirtle isn't just a turtle, it means he sees her as his underling. Looking in the mirror, she resolves not to let Ashton treat her like that. She decides she won't be anyone's pushover or underling. The next day, Annie confidently walks into class with heavy eye makeup, aiming to show her new strength. Her bold look surprises everyone, especially Jessie, who hurries over to ask about the sudden change. Annie explains she woke up early to do her makeup, determined not to let others push her around anymore. Ashton arrives and finds Annie blocking the door with her unique makeup. He's puzzled but amused by her appearance, commenting on it. Joel and others tease Annie, but Ashton steps in to stop them from taking photos. Despite feeling embarrassed, Annie stands firm, unsure why Ashton's attitude shifts from amusement to a smile. She wonders what Ashton really thinks, feeling a mix of confusion and determination. Annie applied eyeliner for the first time ever, hoping Ashton would notice and take her seriously. But he barely reacted, leaving her feeling like her effort was wasted. She worries she's destined to become Ashton's bread shuttle underling, labeled as Squirtle. Annie sadly accepts that her peaceful school life might be over. Ashton tells Annie that being a jester is perfect for her. She asks what she has to do for the job. Ashton explains that she just needs to stick by his side and make him laugh like she did before. He is counting on her, and they are going to have a lot of fun together. They head out. Annie feels marked and wonders if this is what it feels like to be marked. Joel asks what a jester is. Ashton remarks that Annie's new look is priceless, and should be cherished forever. He tells her he's counting on her too. Annie thinks to herself that she'll be delivering laughs instead of bread. William reassures Annie not to worry, he will make sure nothing happens to her. He reminds her that class is starting soon, so they should head back. Annie thinks about how if it were that easy, she wouldn't have come to school with a panda on her face. Annie thought her life was so uneventful that she always wondered what the worst thing could be if something went wrong. She believed any problem would just pass like running water. But today, she realizes that no matter how hard she tries to resolve the issue, she's already marked as Ashton's prey. Jessie notices Annie deep in thought and asks if she's okay. Annie, feeling helpless, asks Jessie what she should do. Jessie, seeing Annie trying to wash something off her face with water, gives her some eye makeup remover. Annie thanks Jessie and asks if it will really erase everything, including being marked by Ashton. Jessie doubts it will help with the latter. She asks Annie why she put on all the makeup in the first place, thinking she got beat up. Annie admits she just copied a celebrity's look and thought it would help her not be scared in front of Ashton. She shows Jessie a picture of Hua Chang from the girl group Mumuma. Annie explains that she did the exact same makeup, but it had no effect. Jessie, confused, asks what part of it was the same. Annie replies that they are both girls. Jessie wonders if Annie was always this naive and tells her that makeup meant for a cool celebrity doesn't suit her innocent face. She scolds Annie for learning makeup from blog posts, and says this is what happens when you rely on the internet. Annie huffs in response. Jessie tells her that her crazy makeup scared the other kids so much that they didn't say anything, and she was shocked to see Annie like that this morning. Just then, the door opens, cutting Jessie off. Tiffany Rose, the most popular girl in school, walks in. Annie thinks to herself how pretty Tiffany is and how makeup looks better on pretty girls like her. Tiffany greets Annie excitedly, apologizing if she startled her. Annie responds awkwardly, feeling a bit overwhelmed. Tiffany introduces herself and mentions that she's been wanting to talk to Annie for a while. She says she's been worried about her lately because of Ashton and offers her support, telling Annie to come to her if anything happens. Tiffany reassures Annie that she's looking out for her because they are classmates. Annie is surprised and grateful, thanking Tiffany for her concern. Tiffany smiles and says she's just going to wash her hands. Annie finishes up and gets ready to leave with Jessie. They say goodbye and head out together. As soon as Annie and Jessie leave, Tiffany mutters to herself, wondering why Annie is hanging out with them and calling her a loser. Annie thinks Tiffany must be an angel because she's so pretty and nice. Jessie, however, feels something is off. Annie asks what she means, and Jessie explains that she has a bad feeling. Annie is confused and presses Jessie to elaborate. Jessie says that in comics, the overly nice character often turns out to be the villain. Annie is surprised and asks if Jessie really thinks Tiffany is evil. Jessie confirms her suspicion, explaining that people who are rotten on the inside often go around smiling like Tiffany. Annie finds it hard to believe, but Jessie insists that denial is what gets people into trouble. She adds that having a nice villain would be better. Annie thinks about how Ashton is just a straight-up villain. She tells herself that she can't run away and isn't sure if she's the court jester or Squirtle, but either way, Ashton is just another student. She decides to enter the classroom with her head held high. As she approaches the door, she sees Ashton standing there. Her resolve crumbles with one look from him. In class, the teacher talks about old folk songs and nightingales, which gives Annie a brief sense of safety. However, she's worried about what will happen when class ends and it's lunchtime. She makes eye contact with Ashton and sees him grinning, which makes her anxious about what he might do during lunch. The bell rings, and the teacher dismisses the class for lunch. Annie feels her worry intensify as she prepares to leave the classroom. As Annie tries to leave the classroom, Ashton calls her Squirtle and reminds her that she has a job to do. Annie asks what her job is again, and Ashton replies, Jester. Annie remembers, but tells him she needs to eat lunch first. She feels trapped and wonders what a jester is supposed to do anyway. She's unsure how to handle the situation and tries to figure out what her role as Ashton's jester actually entails while feeling the pressure of his expectations. William urges Ashton to hurry because they are late, but Ashton says he's skipping lunch because he has something else to do. Joel is shocked and asks where Ashton is going. Ashton mentions something about a heater coronation, which sounds exciting to Joel. Joel begs to go with him, but Ashton insists that he should just go eat. Joel asks why, and Ashton says it will take a while. Annie is puzzled and wonders what exactly Ashton is planning. Ashton then tells her that they have a lot to talk about, just the two of them. Annie is shocked and confused, thinking he must be joking. She wonders what they could possibly have to talk about. Joel suggests to Annie that they should talk later and make a video for YouTube, predicting it would bring in many subscribers. William warns Ashton not to take things too far, reminding him that Mrs. Jones would punish him if she found out. Ashton, confident, reassures William that he's got it under control. Ashton steps closer to Annie, making her nervous. She wonders why he's getting so close. Ashton tells her to get ready, leaving her even more anxious about what he has planned. If you want to see what Ashton's plan is, drop a comment expressing your interest in a part 2. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time, ciao.